to Demos Helsinki and the so-called 3D house, which means that it's not only Demos Helsinki who is in this office, but it's also our dear partners Kaskas Media, which is a science PR office, and Smart and Clean Foundation, and that works for the smarter and cleaner future for metropolitan area of Helsinki. We as Demos Helsinki, our role is at the same time to create impact to the society and at the same time to serve our clients. We always say that we have two clients. One is the one who pays and gets the kind of factual outcome, and then the other one is society. So every time we do something, there has to be use for the outcomes for both of these. And that's what makes us different from some other actors. That's what makes us to be a think tank. At the same time, it means that we really need strong partners and organizations to collaborate with. And in this process, which we are going through today, Sitra has been very important partner for us. Together with Sitra, we have been working also earlier, but in this paper especially, I think we have really joined forces. It has been a series of papers which started by our paper, and then there was Elina Kiiski who made the second one from Sitra's side, and this third one is again chaired by us. So first of all, very warm thanks to Sitra. And second of all, warm welcome. I'm very happy to see all of you here. I'm very happy to share this morning with you, and I'm also very happy to look collaboration opportunities together with you after this. It's Aleksi Neuvonen from our side who has been chairing and being the main writer of the document we are now having a look at. So Aleksi, please, welcome.
So good morning on my behalf as well. Great to be here. As Tuuli said, we joined forces 1.5 years ago in Demos Helsinki with Sitra to work on thing that Sitra has been working already for quite a while, which is called sustainable well-being. What's the vision for the next phase of the Nordic model? And this has resulted in a number of applications, as Tuuli mentioned, and we've been working with a good number of people from both organizations. From Demos Helsinki, we've had a team where there has been Tuuli, Tero Tomokka, Julia Jousilahti is somewhere here as well, and Juha Leppänen not here yet, and then Lari Hokkanen. And in Sitra's side, there's Jenna Lähdemäki, who's already present. Vesa Mattilahti, who actually edited the paper that we today publish. Tatu Leinonen over there. And Paula Laine will be here shortly. Also, Timo Hämäläinen has given great inspiration over the course of this work. And this event here is a side event to World Circular Economy Forum that took place in Helsinki yesterday and on Monday. Circular economy, essentially, I think, is a new way of thinking of economy and resources, and what are the kind of capabilities of transforming things to well-being and progress in society, which means that when we are today discussing progress in the memorandum that we are publishing, I think we are very close to that sphere as well. So we thought it would make sense to try to kind of connect there. And I think luckily we got at least some people visiting Helsinki for that particular event, and hope to initiate this discussion also internationally. Actually, this is the second launch of this report. We launched it already a week ago in Tokyo, in a place called Fab Cafe, which is a place for new type of manufacturing and in Japanese culture and work life. It's quite new phenomenon, as you understand, Japan has been known for being a nation of big corporations and a place where you are manufacturing single items with mainly by freelancer people is quite different. So probably that might be a symptom of a new type of progress as well. So just to explain you briefly what this all is all about, what is the process that we've been undertaking with Sitra. It's called The Next Era. Today we are in a chapter or part of that process which deals with the idea of progress. What is the idea of progress in next era, meaning the time that comes after the industrial era that we're about to end. As said, it's a joint initiative by Demos Helsinki and Sitra. There's an idea of reforming the Nordic welfare model as a way we see societies, as some of the values that we see as the kind of underlying structure of these societies, and based on the idea of sustainable well-being, which as a minimal definition is something like this. Good life, not only kind of a very material way of seeing well-being, meaning that how people feel that they are happy that they are living good life, but within the constraints of a planet. The things that we know about climate change, about limited resources that we have within this planet. And now the question that we are posing here is, what is then progress? I think we've come to a conclusion where many of us think that there has to be some type of momentum, there has to be some type of a dynamism in society, something that has been probably caused by at least development and progress in science and technology over the past 200 years. What should it be like? Why should it be done in the next era? And what we try to do is, first of all, talking about transformation, understanding that we are undergoing some type of transformation in all of our developed societies, probably also in the developing ones. But beyond the talk on transformation, we need also an idea of a vision. Where are we heading to? That is not enough only to talk about the vision, where we are heading to, but to track what are the kind of possible, interesting initiatives, social innovations, new experiments that might be showing the way towards that vision. And thirdly, to understand what is the role of that vision. It's a narrative that could help people potentially better to understand where their life is taking them, where our society is heading to. Actually, last week in Tokyo, we had a very good definition of what narrative is. It's not a story. A story has an ending. A narrative is something that people can jump into and then feel that they are being engaged, but they can create themselves the ending to the story. So far, we've published 3 memorandums. The first one was on work and income, called From Pause to Play. That was launched in January. The second one, From the Trials of Democracy Towards Future Participation on Democracy, as you understand, was published in March, and now we are publishing Rewiring Progress. So this is a kind of a way of kind of going through 3 big areas of change in our societies: work and income, democracy and participation, and then finally to the question of growth and progress. We also published a number of other articles. They are all online at nextera.global or in Finnish seuraavaera.fi. And in addition to that, we've tested these ideas in a number of places on this globe. We had a discussion or a workshop in San Francisco in January, one in London on democracy and participation that also produced a good number of examples of new ways of seeing democracy and participation. And finally, last week in Tokyo, as I mentioned, where we discussed the question of progress, societal progress in this era. And then, in addition to that, we've tried to do initiate this same discussion within kind of ordinary Finns. There's an initiative called Time Out, erätauko in Finnish, which is a way of kind of kind of having futures-oriented discussion with normal ordinary people invited for a half-a-day workshop to craft some ideas and solutions regarding what we discussed there, where work and income, and now there will be another series of these workshops in Kajaani and Vantaa discussing the question of democracy and participation. And now we are here discussing mainly the question of progress. What is progress in the next era? We have good guess probably what is progress. We've read about that over the past year. These are some news from last year. And all of these, I would say, from the perspective of, let's say, year 2000, look still rather science fiction stories. There are tech millionaires who are putting all their money to plans to take man to Mars. There are one of the most remarkable events last year was that an artificial intelligence by Google won the best player in Go, which is said to be a very complicated game that cannot be won only by having crude computational power. You have to have some type of a creativity and learning in that process. And then what we've seen over the past 3 years is that there are robots driving cars being tested on our streets in actual cities. Actually, our organization has been involved in one trial in Helsinki regarding robot buses. So imagine, think, try to remember when you heard first the idea of an automated vehicle. I think for much of your lifetime that has sounded like a science fiction story, and now it's happening right here, right now. And yet, this doesn't seem to make us happy, or at least part of the population very happy. Politics, of course, should be the way or a vehicle for people to express whether they feel okay or happy about how world is going forward. And it looks like in many countries, people are not necessarily very happy about the course of the development in our societies. And that also shows in opinion polls. This was by Pew Research, polled late last year. Shows the question is, when you think of your children growing up, will they be better off financially than you? And as you see, in the US and Europe, less than a third of the population feels that their children will be better off financially than what they are right now. Whereas in many of the developing countries, still people have higher hopes towards their children to be better off. And in China, that figure is even higher. And, well, we might have plenty of answers to that question. Why is that? Why is that thing happening? Why people are losing their hope on our societies advancing? And economy probably is the best explanation for that. I mean, if you look at the growth figures of all of the kind of developed countries, yeah, it's been something like 1% in Finland, around 1%. Now we are growing a little bit faster. All of the other countries below 2%, essentially. In a world where usually good level of growth was thought to be something like 2.5% at least, or 4% or 5%. Japan, which has been in a stagnation, it has been maximum 1.5% over the past 10 years. In the US, we've seen a greater growth pace from 4 to 5%, but we know what type of growth that is. Disposable incomes of households haven't grown for 40 years for many of the middle income families, meaning that there is growth, but that is not necessarily benefiting the great majority of people. And we know how connected our societies, our lifestyle, and our politics are to economic growth. This has been essentially the model of progress in our societies, at least for the latter half of the 20th century. We had economic growth, which created job opportunities, work for people, income opportunities. Countries were governed by democratic systems, meaning that governments also had both tax money to channel to good purposes to enable people from different backgrounds to benefit from the growth. And that created tremendous well-being. There are some symbols of that. People, families, generations advancing, getting better education than their parents, getting better level of income, getting better quality of life than their parents. And for great part of the last century, I would say, economic growth was a very good measure for progress. It liberated people. It kind of helped us to get rid of all of the material deficiencies. It enabled states to make inclusive policies. It enabled better inclusion for people through job opportunities. It provided ways to invest in good causes in science, technology, education. And of course, it also turned out to be a symbol of progress. People could see that their country was getting better because of economic growth measured by GDP, which occasionally was faster than in the neighboring country. So it was a kind of a bit of a competition as well, a good way of kind of showing where we are heading to. Something we know about behavioral science is that we don't turn happy on a certain level of well-being or material well-being and then stay as happy as we got. Behavioral scientists have shown that we grow tired quite fast to what we've already achieved. Having a new house, new car doesn't make us happy next year. We have to kind of get something more every year. And especially if we see someone else getting more than what we've had, getting a newer car, getting a new piece of furniture might make us very unhappy because we are kind of feeling that we are lagging behind. Which is, of course, a great challenge for our quest for well-being and progress. Either people have to get more and more of material goods, or then we have to find other ways of kind of making us happy. And now the question is, are we going to see more of the growth that we've seen over the past century or so? There are good reasons why not. We haven't had very much experience of societies and economies growing in a fast pace when the populations had been fastly aging. Most of the recorded history on fast growth has been in societies with great number of young people, plenty of people entering the workforce, and with good number of also needs that have to be met to those people. Secondly, our structure of economy is changing from a economy where much of the economic activity was manufacturing goods, people consuming goods. We have entered an era where much of our time we are using digital services, which can be produced in masses in a different way, scaled with also almost zero marginal costs. And now what economists have found out is that doesn't necessarily create economic growth in a way that producing material goods does. It might enhance our well-being, it might make our life easier and better, but it doesn't necessarily show in our growth figures. And in addition to that, there's something that we've known already for some decades. global economy seems to be a phenomenon which happens mainly in metropolitan regions connected internationally. There are plenty of rural and formal industrial regions that have been in decline for the past 30 years, 40 years in UK and Central Europe, in Finland for the past 20 years. And there seems to be very little hope of invigorating them in a way that they would be seeing the growth on a pace that they used to see. So the question of is the growth something that we could see? Well, might happen on the level of nations, doesn't necessarily happen in all of the kind of regions that we have in our countries. And then the fourth dilemma, let's say, of growth is that probably, what we know about climate change, what we know about the resources that we have available, we have to limit certain resources, their usage, which means that at least some regions will suffer from that. If we say that let's stop using that fossil fuel, let's reduce use of that resource that you've been kind of getting most of your income. We might see growth, but that there will be people who will see less of that growth in their region and might be losing their jobs, of course. And now we have several ways forward based on these dilemmas. There's of course the question of whether we can kind of continue the way that we've done in the past. Increase our well-being through economic growth, which would mean increased amount of use of resources, which of course then might lead into a situation where at some point we have to reduce them fast because of the depletion of natural resources. Or we might continue the way that we've been doing for the past decade. Well-being, and we don't know necessarily what has happened to well-being, but at least economic growth has been sluggish. At the same time, we've been able to advance our technology in a way which means that the usage of natural resources could be in decline, which is of course a positive news. Then, with the third option, is that we could find ways through which we can increase our well-being faster than economic growth, and at the same time decrease our natural resources usage. That is something that we don't have necessarily tools to control that. That would mean to kind of reinvent the idea that we increase our well-being. And then fourthly, we have the already rather classical idea of green growth. So renewing our structures, renewing our societies, investing in technologies that enable us to radically decrease our natural resources usage. We can also spur growth, and through that, in a rather traditional way, well-being. These are the options that we have in hand. And now the question I think that we should revisit is whether the way we see progress and well-being is still fit for the post-industrial era. Should we think well-being and progress in a new way when we are living in societies like the ones we are at the moment, which don't necessarily have any more such deficiencies in material needs as we had in the past. And there, I think we should revisit the question of what is progress. And going back to late 18th century, when people like John Locke and for instance Immanuel Kant, whose phrase actually that is thought of progress, they defined that through essentially emancipation of an individual. How people can be liberated from the different type of constraints that they have in life. How people could be made such that they are free from state of immaturity, meaning that someone is controlling them too much or that they can kind of control their own life. Meaning that it's essentially this, growing up, going forward, getting better resources in your life to advance whatever you see valuable. And traditionally it has meant this. We've been investing hugely to education, seeing that actually the greatest source of progress is in individuals. And especially in Nordic countries, that has been the story. We believe that every citizen, every individual has capabilities that can contribute to our societies and also enhance the overall well-being of our societies. And that meant that, rather symbolically, that we increased our kind of education level. Kind of a classical story of a Finnish progress is people becoming the first graduate of their own family. And that contributed people who had greater skills than the previous generations, thought that they can kind of cope individually. We believed quite much in kind of developing people and through that also enhancing our economic performance. But of course, that was only half of the story. We've always collaborated. It's also a matter of how well we can collaborate, how well we can form teams, how well we function as societies, how we see our capabilities as something collective. And you probably know that there are very few items, goods, or services that an individual could produce by oneself. All of the things that we produce in modern industrial societies are done in collaboration with combination of different types of skills. And now it happens globally. Our skills, our capabilities are based on vast number of people in different parts of the world. And now when going back to the emancipation, people growing up, the question is, how should we fit this idea to the question of progress? And of course, one of the great stories of our era is the internet. That used to have 10 years ago 1 billion people online. That's a lot. Now we have 3.2 billion people online, which is, 40% of the human population. What type of progress, what type of change in human capabilities that change, the leap from 1 billion people to 3.2 billion people is? Or if you imagine it to be elevated to entire human population to 7.5 people, connected with their skills, connected to access to all of the information there is nowadays online in internet. And some people have started to call that abundance, meaning that we are abundant in whatever information there is. Abundant in the skills that people have that are available for the same system for building something new. And also what we see in developed countries is that it's abundance of getting whatever there is globally as a material good. You can kind of order that and it will be in a couple of days at your home. And the next phase will be connected also the new ways of producing energy with micro production of energy means that we will have probably abundance, at least locally, in energy. And kind of a good evidence of that is that whatever you can learn nowadays in internet. There are plenty of videos on how to do certain things. I selected this one because the launch last week was in a place called Fab Cafe, where there are plenty of 3D printers. You can learn that online, watching YouTube videos. Actually, I tried to embed these videos to this presentation. There were, of course, YouTube videos instructing you how to do that, but well, I couldn't do that for me. I mean, if you think of the people living, for instance, in Ethiopia, or whichever part of the world, if you need to kind of enhance your farming capabilities, there are videos for that. If you would like to learn maths, there are kind of academic type of resources for that. And I mean, of course, plenty of more standard things that we think nowadays as a kind of a really commonplace and things that we had for at least a decade, like Wikipedia. You can find information on what everything there is online nowadays, which is a great change in the way we see abundance or what we have available in information. And I think our way of seeing progress should be based on this new state that we are at the moment, which contains also enhanced opportunities for collaboration between people and information being connected. Which means that probably the way of seeing progress cannot be any more about having economic growth, which could then also benefit other types of well-being. It's much, much more. There should be increasing attention to how human capabilities are being increased, not in a way that they would only contribute as kind of a better performance in work life. And then probably what's also needed is a notion of fairness in society, that people would feel that this is something that they are being included and they are getting their fair share. And essentially these would be producing the same outputs as the previous system. Just having attention in greater number of things than just the kind of economic growth. Human capability is growing. This we actually mentioned, yeah. And of course, the target is that we should be able to kind of tackle the wicked problems that we have in our global society. Climate change, different type of conflicts between cultures. We have better skills, capabilities available for that than ever. And that would mean also enhanced way of kind of seeing how people can flourish in different parts of the world. It's not necessarily easy. This is kind of just a way of initiating discussion how we should see progress in the coming global post-industrial era. Probably at the end, good to see that this has already happened once again. We've already seen and recorded very well in our history a transformation in how we see how production or how big changes in ways of production take place and what are the consequences to societies and people. Industrial revolution in 19th century was actually, although it was a start of the economic growth in a way that we've seen it over the past decades, was already also a long and painful experience for very, very many people. Paintings like this portraying the suffering of urban poverty in industrial towns was actually a long part of history, lasting half a century almost. And now we have to ask the question, what happened then? And it was that we had plenty of new social innovations that were not thought to be solutions when industrial revolution started, but were created during that process, starting from small initiatives by people, mainly voluntary activities that were then grown to become institutes run by states, which include things like this. All of the social security systems, the idea of a welfare state, primary education system, political parties, labor unions, all were created during that era. And now the question is, what are the social innovations that we need for the new next era that comes beyond the industrial era transformation towards information society. I'll leave it here. Now I invite a comment from Scott Vaughan, who's visiting Helsinki for World Circular Economy Forum. Scott is President and CEO of IISD, the International Institute for Sustainable Development, which is an independent non-profit organization that tries to combine environmental and social priorities with economic development. Scott has done a great part of his career in different global institutions, WTO, UNEP, plus several remarkable institutions in Canada. So, Scott, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Good morning, all. I think I have 3 of my ISD board members here, so it's very intimidating. First of all, thanks very much. And as you've said, I was here for the Sitra Circular Economy meeting, so really congratulations to Sitra and also to Finland. I mean, I think this was really one of the meetings of the world where people came from, I think, 90 countries looking at this challenge of circular economy. So I really benefited immensely, and I'm grateful for the invitation this morning. So I just wanted to comment on this wonderful paper and the work that you're doing. And I wanted to tell a little bit about the work that we're doing in Canada in our institution. So we're pretty small, so I'll sit. So I first wanted to say YouTube, the single most viewed site, as you said, is how to. And so you can go online now and figure out how to paint or how to do mathematical equations, or in my case, how to fix a roof. So I told my wife I was going to go look on YouTube and figure out how to fix our roof in our cottage. And I must have downloaded it about 10,000 times. And at the end, we hired a specialist to go to fix the damage I did, as well as what I was trying to fix. So, but I think what it shows is that when you think about that, you think about, well, what happens if I was good at it? What would happen to people who have spent their careers specializing in roof fixing? Or what about people that publish books about roofs? And what do people think about, you know, that whole service economy? And so I think your paper outlines just this sort of historical moment of transition where we're going into a information world, but we're still burdened by our tools that have emerged from almost well over a century. And that's what I wanted to talk a little about this morning, very briefly, was some of the tools that we have inherited. And I think you put it very well, that what are the tools that constrain us from looking at the full potential well-being. And so I wanted to begin with this question of income. And income is at the basis of what every prime minister and president watches every quarter, which is GDP. And GDP is what makes or breaks political careers. And that notion of GDP comes from, the basis of it is the word income. And income comes from a 13th century English etymology, which is come in. And then that was come into my home, come into my business. And then that income from that etymology came to looking at how accounts payable from a business would come into one's business. And you had a ledger and you saw that you had incoming 100 euros every month, and that was the income of your business. And that income notion, which was a very, very, very specific measurement of how a business is doing, now becomes the framing concept of how our countries are doing. And so we have in GDP, essentially, it measures the income of Finland. And what it doesn't then do is look at what we all care about in our lives, our families, our human well-being, our community well-being, our educational pathways, because what GDP was designed to do was to measure income. And that particular measurement is really from that early 13th century etymology. It then became a tool which emerged essentially from a series of crises. So it then became, during the First World War, they needed to have, all countries needed to figure out how do we look at wartime economy management, particularly supply management of munitions and others. And then people kind of left it, that national accountants that were looking at national income accounts, and it was sort of forgotten. And then there was the Great Depression, so very similar to what you've just mentioned now in 2007, 2008. And so then people looked at again, so we need to have a standard area of national accounts. And then there was work that was done on that, and then it kind of left again. And then during the Second World War, is where the emergence of the Bretton Woods system. And from the Bretton Woods system, which has now framed the last 70 years of the international economic order, that notion of GDP became the centerpiece of the Bretton Woods system, and that was basically the formulation of two giants in the economics field of John Maynard Keynes of the United Kingdom and John Hopkins. And so we are now, our lives are largely saddled with this idea of looking at GDP as being our primary measurement of how our countries are doing. So one of the tools we've been looking at is to say, well, what, and I think you captured it very well, is that what are we missing from these? And we know now that, and particularly because of the accelerating global ecological crisis, that what are the costs of climate change impacts to Finland? What are the costs of exposure to multiple persistent organic pollutants or heavy metals or air pollution within Helsinki, or exposure to water contamination? And those costs are real costs, but again, they would not naturally be captured in terms of GDP measurements. And so one very famous example of this was the Exxon Valdez spill in Alaska. When it was measured up, was measured as an overall contribution to US GDP. And the reason why is because you didn't have a way of measuring the damages that oil spill caused. But there was a lot of lawyers who were hired, there were a lot of cleanup companies that were hired, there were a lot of specialists that were hired. And so when you measured all that income, it actually, the Exxon Valdez looked like a good thing to the United States economy. And we all know that's profoundly untrue. So just two things we've done in our research institute to sort of think about what are alternatives to this. And the first one is to look at what then is the cost of pollution that is not captured in our national accounts. So just last week, and these are two recent examples of our work. So just last week, we released a report looking specifically at Canada and saying what is the cost of pollution in Canada, and we went through those categories that I just mentioned. So exposure to multiple air criteria, air pollutants of NOx and SOx and PM 2.5, and then looking at persistent organic pollutants and legacy heavy metals and et cetera. And then went through all the medical literature from that, as well as then economic literature. We had a group of very, very careful statisticians, and then we also, because we're an environmental and sustainability think tank, that the business community and the Minister of Finance probably won't believe us, that we then worked and partnered with a very, very respected economic institution in Canada, and the figure we came up with was $40 billion a year. So about $4,000 per family in Canada. So that probably then is similar to the United States, and it was also extremely conservative because there's a lot of data for which we simply do not know, and persistent organic pollutants would be one. But what we wanted to do was to show that these are real costs. There's a real cost to families, there's a real cost to our healthcare system, there's a real cost to our infrastructure, application of salt, which is a very small example, but accelerates the degradation of bridges and infrastructure across the country. So that was the figure we came up with. And then we said, well, what do we do with this figure? And how does this fit within the current framework of GDP? And it doesn't. So then the bigger challenge is, why don't we change how we measure progress? And I think this is what your work is suggesting very clearly, is that what are the tools we need to measure our overall well-being? And so what we did within Canada, and I had a PowerPoint presentation. It's there? It's not, anyways, it's not there. It's okay. So I left examples of this, but what we did is we went back and we looked at, first of all, how Canada was doing, and you could do this for Finland, or you could do it for Germany, you could do it for others, is to say, if you looked at Canada's GDP measurement in the last 30 years, it's just fantastic news. So it just goes up by about 2% a year, consistently over that 30-year period. And then you say, well, then let's look at a different way of looking at our national well-being, or our national accounts. And so from that, there's a very strong tradition of literature in this from very well-respected economists, for those of you who aren't economists, the Cambridge Partha Dasgupta, and then Robert Repetto and David Pearce and Kirk Hamilton and others. And so people have been looking at this now for 30 years of how do you do national income accounts that would capture some of the issues that you've been doing. So we took that methodology, and it's very much been then, in the last couple of years, it's been now brought to an international framework because of work by the UN Environment Programme with the World Bank and the IMF and OECD and others. So we took this methodology, which is based not on modeling forward or scenarios forward, but looking at what does the data that exists today tell us about how Canada's been doing in that last 30-year period. So GDP, the news is great, but if you looked at it from a different perspective with a new tool, which in this case is called comprehensive wealth, and that was what I passed around, the story is very, very different. So from that perspective of comprehensive wealth or inclusive wealth, what it showed was that there's virtually no growth in Canada in the last 30 years. There's been a very small, so where the areas, I have it in front of me in terms of the numbers, and for those of you that have it here, so in terms of Canada's overall comprehensive wealth, it's about 0.19% per year over that 30-year period. So it's almost absolute stagnation. And then within that, breaking it down into the four categories. So the four categories are human capital, meaning how do we value ourselves within an economy? The social capital, how do we view ourselves together? And you think about that valuing together within, for example, now the rage we see in democracies because of income inequality, because of job uncertainty, because of wage uncertainty. So that social cohesion within countries is eroding now because of the Rust Belt areas that you've talked about. And you see that rage in people like Marine Le Pen or Donald Trump. So that social cohesion is profoundly important to our communities. And then the third is produced capital, and then the fourth is natural capital. So when you take those four clusters and then you pull the data together, on the overall level, Canada's comprehensive wealth has not moved at all, just marginally upwards. But then the area which was the best news was produced capital, was investments that are going into things. But even within that, Canada, when you broke it down, it was in two areas. Housing, the value of houses has gone up exponentially. And then the second area was oil and gas, so the fossil fuel sector. So those two areas were where most of the produced capital in my country were concentrated, and that represented 70% of all the produced capital in the last 30 years. So if you took out those two, which are prone either to housing bubbles because of volatility, or oil and gas because of now stranded assets as the climate agenda moves forward, you realize how vulnerable we are as a country. And then the last thing is this natural capital. And so what was the most startling about our report was that a lot of our growth in Canada, very similar to Finland, is a very natural resource intensive economy. The natural capital in Canada declined by 25% over the last 30 years. So a decline of 1/4 of our country's entire natural capital. And so the message that we came out with is the trajectory that Canada has over the last 30 years simply mathematically cannot be repeated for the next 30 years. So we simply cannot, as a matter of a matter of how much natural resources are left and the quality of those resources, that our development model will not sustain our country over another 30-year period. So that it's summarized in that area I put out in front of you, and also just what the motivation was, and also the methods that we used. So the last thing I would say is, I was talking with a colleague from Sitra for Palo this morning, is that we all want to ensure that we have an impact on our communities and our countries and on policy. And I would say the impact of this study has been negligible to zero. And so we, earnestly went out and briefed the Minister of Finance and his Chief of Staff and parliamentarians. and people in the banking sector and talk to the media, and they all look at you like you're absolutely crazy. Like, what are you talking about trying to change GDP? So with that in mind, I think this just sort of underscores the challenge of what you've raised in your paper, is that we need new tools to think about how we move onto a trajectory of well-being. But right now, the tools that we have in place are essentially codified so that GDP becomes now entered into our vernacular. So my daughter said to me the other day something about GDP, and I was startled, and she's 9 years old. So this, I think, underscores that this becomes among the most entrenched indicators. And we're not saying it hasn't done anything useful. On the contrary, it's extremely important, but it's inadequate and insufficient and not comprehensive for the challenges that we have. So where I'm hopeful and where I'll end is, when I think now about the leadership of Finland on the circular economy, of looking at how do you look at multiple elements together, or in the international agenda with the Sustainable Development Goals, the very notion of Sustainable Development Goals is we will not have economic growth without environmental protection and without social inclusion. So those principles of holistic approaches are ones that we're at least seeing some beginning to. So I'll stop there. So thank you.
Thank you, Scott. I mean, that was extremely useful to go through the question of GDP and what type of other measures we might have to complement really that. And I mean, our intention actually in the memorandum was kind of avoid going to that discussion directly, because we had the same experience that you mentioned, that it's kind of quite often rather useless to kind of introduce a new way of measuring progress. If you don't have the background, and we try to kind of provide this time the background philosophy, and then possibly go to what has already been done, for example, in your case that you mentioned from Canada. So thank you, that was really useful for this debate. Now we have a kind of a short moment to reflect this with two peers from other think tanks. We have Sini Rouhonen from Suomen Toivo. Toivo?
Just Toivo.
Toivo? Okay. Please have a seat. And then Simo Grönroos from, is it still Suomen Perusta, not only Perusta?
Suomen Perusta.
Suomen Perusta. We were supposed to have here also Riikka Suominen from Vihreä Lanka, but unfortunately she's ill, so she couldn't come. So we'll have a brief session, a chat here with these two people. So hoping to also have my contribution here, not just asking you questions. So we have actually 3 people here discussing. Just to start, as you, I don't know if it was mentioned, but we are in a former library that was built in the 50s to serve students of University of Helsinki. It was a place where people picked the books for the exams. It was built by donation funds. There's actually a great piece of art at the entrance. If you look, you're not cannot see it right now, but when you go out, there's a great painting that somehow I would say epitomizes quite well the very special sentiment of hope and progress that people probably had back then in the 50s. I showed in one of the slides the chart in which indicates that only 1/3 of the people believe that their children will be financially better off than what they are themselves right now in US and European countries. What is your reaction? What has happened? Why we have lost that sentiment that people who built this building and donated money for this had?
Well, I was thinking when you talked about emotions, that's the right answer beside the numbers, of course. But first of all, the emotions makes this progress thing a very political question. Because what's the feeling? And I think before we didn't have so much awareness what's happening in whole global world. We knew just what we had at home and what the neighbors had, and the possibilities were like, am I going to be a policeman, a fireman, or what is going to happen in future? The feeling was, it was easier to see a world like this. Now we have this internet, of course, and we see like developing countries, what's the situation is there, and or Syrian war or terrorism and everything. And then we are told that, well, our children have possibilities that you can do anything you want in your whole life. So how does it feel? It's not so easy to see what is happening tomorrow if we see the whole world wide open in front of our eyes whole time.
The world becoming increasingly complex, more difficult to navigate, more troubles from distant places.
Yeah. And the responsibility from our adults when we raise our kids. We should tell them that there are possibilities, but there are certain ways what can happen. And you have good life to come if you do things like this. So there isn't possibilities for everything. There are possibilities for something when you do the right things. So the way we see world, it's complicated.
By the way, I had to open this panel with response by Sini because for non-Finnish speakers, toivo means hope, so probably they think Tang is the best apt for this. So, I mean, Simo, you probably have as good an answer to this as well. What do you think?
Yes, there is in the whole Western world like a very pessimistic attitude has been a long time. And well, you can think it, if we talk about the progress, there is also another point of view, and there is like Oswald Spengler view that there is cycles in the time, and it's not always for the good, so there is always for the bad times also. And maybe we can see that in the Western world, there has been too long time good times in economical ways, and people are now too long time good. It's people are making problems with smaller things.
Just have grown tired of this. They can kind of cannot invent anything new or good out of this system, something like that. So it's kind of psychological, cultural movement of societies. But there has to be something good. Where do you see then progress? Where have we progressed in over the past, let's say, 30 years? If you think of the year 1987, for instance.
Well, everything. I think so.
Just going to, what are the greatest? Let's say, name the greatest things of social progress.
Globalization, free trade, movements. Labor can move, and things can move from place to another. We have never been so well-being as right now. So the pessimism is paradoxal, as you wrote in this report.
Well, there is a different point of view for that, because in last decades the welfare state in Finland has grown, and people have thought that this is a big progress. But nowadays we have one of the biggest social states in the world and one of the highest taxation. So can you anymore say that a more social state is progress? And another point of view is that internationalism, and in the last decades we have opened our borders to the world and joined international organizations and had more immigration. But nowadays you can ask, is it any more progress that we give more power from Finland to like Brussels and centralized European federalism? And is it any more progress that we have more immigration? And I think in Finland and in Europe and in the whole Western world there has been a lot of protest against that kind of progress. And you can ask, is it progress anymore?
Probably you see also some type of progress. Where has the progress happened then over the past 30 years, or has it been only decline over the past decades?
No, well, of course, in technological things, the progress is easy to see, and usually people don't disagree. But if you talk about progress, you have many cases you have a different point of view. Is it progress for who? Like economical progress, it's bad for ecological things in many cases. So it's not easy to say what progress means. If you Google progress, you get things are going for the better. But who is against that? But if you think it for closely, it's you have to ask: is the progress good for who?
What do you think, Sini, of this?
Well, it's a philosophical question. What's the progress? I don't disagree with that. But way we see the economical way, well, the growth is one kind of measuring things, but also we need innovations and things like that to make progress, and that's where we need globalization and also immigration and things like that, open borders. So without them, we are closed. And also I see like the globalization is not a political decision in a way that our young people, they are moving. If we close our borders, they are going away. They are going somewhere where they are opened. So the people are going where they want to live, as well as what decisions we are making here in Finland about our borders. So I don't see the future like that. The progress is something different.
Let's move on to the question of economic growth. Quite apparently, I mean, all of the politics that we have in Western countries, they are quite closely tied to the idea of economic growth. There's quite little that a politician can do if there is no growth, other than kind of cutting public spending and kind of things that usually are not that kind of good in bring about, let's say, at least planned progress. They might have some side effects that could be seen as progress. But I mean, so quite bluntly said, if there is no growth, there seems to be very little in bring about also progress through politics. And I mean, this is something that we've of course witnessed over the past decade, and it might look a little bit better at the moment, but it's not kind of we cannot be quite confident that that would kind of turn the tide again towards greater amount of growth. This is making our politics rather vulnerable, I mean, to kind of provide any type of hope or any promises. Should we look at different ways of kind of bring about progress through politics? Is politics too much kind of connected to the fact that we either have or not have growth and then more public spending?
You told that economic growth isn't possible if we have immaterial goods, or that's.
Or it's difficult to measure as a growth.
Well, for me it sounds like a bit crazy, because, for example, we had books as printed goods, and that's the way how they was a threat to our environment. But now they are digital. So how is it a problem with economic growth if the goods are different kind of goods?
Let me elaborate that a little bit. I mean, it was, I mean, publishing, printing books required
that was
plenty of kind of effort to get that done, plenty of work, things that were recorded as economic activity as part of GDP. Every item required some work. It required logs to be taken into the paper mill and so on. Now, a digital book requires very little effort. It kind of pushes the costs down. It doesn't require that much a different type of economic activities, which means that there's actually less activity. The costs are going down. The same good evidence of that is also photography. Think of what was the contribution of cameras and different types of devices connected to photographing, for instance, for Japan 30 years ago, and what is now. Yeah. And how important photos and taking photos is for our life at the moment.
But maybe if we are in the middle of the change right now, so the GDPs and economic growth it's the middle of the change. So maybe if we go back in history and see like there was coming like washing machines, so it didn't make us our GDP lagged, or it didn't give us any free time more. It just made us to do new kind of jobs. Right. So we are getting there right now, I think.
Well, I this is a kind of a question where jury is still out, I would say. But rather influential economists are saying that this might be the case, that we don't necessarily see that as economic growth. What do you think, Simo?
Yes,
not only to this very kind of a specific, kind of a detailed question, but also the question of, are we too much tied to economic growth when we think of the politics?
Yes, I just want to comment. Of course, when the technology advances and the progress happens there is also winners and losers. Those get cheaper books, and the book printers are out of jobs. That's one problem with the progress, of course. But the question with the GDP and progress, I think Mr. Vaughan had a good point that the well-being is a much bigger thing than just the numbers. Like we see what is the GDP of the country, but I would be ready to pay more taxes if there would be more safety, less crimes in the streets. We see in the television there is a lot of terrorism around Europe. Would you be ready to pay 50 cents more from the coffee you buy from the shops if there would be no terrorists and more safety? And the whole concept that like a social capital, like for example in the United States there is this Robert Putnam, sociologist, who has studied a lot of the concept of social capital, like how much people trust with their neighbors and other people. And I think that is a far greater question in a society than the GDP that we can keep, like example Finland, society where people can trust with other people. And like Sini earlier said, that the immigration and open borders are a good thing. Like Mr. Putnam has studied a lot of this question, and his studies shown very clearly that multiculturalism and more diverse places are less people trust with other people. And that is one thing that the government can do, have good decisions, for example in immigration policy, and you don't need more GDP on that, you need just a good policies.
Right, so that's an example of kind of a really driving through values.
Immaterial well-being.
Okay. Yeah, so security, for instance, or sense of that. One of the things that we suggested in the report and also in my presentation is that we are entering a new era in our way of producing things and organizing our society. We've been in some type of transition from industrial era for at least 30 years, but I think quite often over the past, let's say 5 years, we've seen the symptom of that change becoming more material. And yet, we understand that quite many of our structures, welfare state mentioned here, nation states, many of our political parties, institutions, structures hail from industrial era solutions. Quite much of the confusion in the politics, quite much of the debate is about whether these existing structures can still fulfill their mission of serving people, serving the progress of societies. What do you think? What type of renewal we need? Where should we start renewing towards the new post-industrial era?
Well, back to globalization thing, and we recognize these global storms and global problems all the time. We talk about climate change and economical problems and a separated world, but the problems are too big to solve. It's confusing. What do you say? What do you think? But maybe if we got more in local problems, local issues, and try to solve those kind of things and make politics more local, then the people, voters, are feeling it easier to understand, and we can make solving problems that we can recognize. I think the way we should do politics is more local.
Right. That's a definitely good answer, and I think that's kind of a seeing the nation level being kind of a possibly less important than it used to be, and then seeing the solution being more local.
Yeah, not only nation. I see cities can make it too, because people live in cities. They don't live in a certain country or live in a certain country. They live in cities. They feel like home cities. And so the issues should be focused on there. So what's the city which is going to be hiilineutraali at first in Finland? That's the question that we can get voters and trust to our policies and decision makers.
How about you, Simon? What do you think? What should be the kind of first steps in renewal of our policies towards post-industrial era structures?
Well, I don't know if I had an answer on that, but the problem is like Mr. Vaughan thought about the old tools, and in every section of society we have old tools, like you showed that in YouTube you can learn almost everything nowadays, and still we have schools and universities and like that, and if we would just suggest and that we should cut down the humanistic faculty because people can read books and learn everything from the internet, of course the professors and everybody would be against it. And like in every sector in social stuff and like that, there is a lot of people who get money from the old system and are against renewing the system. So it's a problem.
Thank you. I think we need to end here. I think it was just a kind of a good start for a debate on progress. And our assumption has been that that discussion has been kind of absent from our political debate over the past couple of decades, and now with this memorandum, with this debate, the idea is to kind of initiate it anew and kind of find ways through which we can kind of go deeper into the question where we are heading to and how should we see the progress happening in society. So thank you, Sini. Thank you, Simo, for this moment of chatting. Now we still have one speaker, one comment, one person who has somehow tried to capture the sentiment that we've had in this room. Eeva Luhta-Kallio is an assistant professor in sociology in University of Tampere. She's also been involved in our Next Era process. She's a member of our international task group and has been following our work for the past half a year, and now has, of course, read the memorandum and listened to what we discussed today, and kind of will reflect still what we got from this day. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning also from my part. Yes, as Aleksi said, I have followed the great work by Demos and Sitra for quite some time, actually even more than 6 months. It's been years in a way. And I've begun to think there's a bit of a hidden division of labor here between us. Demos and Sitra, who try to look at the future with bright eyes and tend to see bright landscapes, and then I come along with the weight of the academic community in my back, with having a lot less pink binoculars and tend to see sort of darker and grimmer scenarios. But in many ways, I think this division of labor is also functional. Without the more sort of optimistic and positive views presented by Aleksi and others and put forward constantly in their reports, my take on the future would tend to be pretty depressing. But I also think that sort of a bit of realistically seasoned pessimism doesn't harm anyone either. And being too optimistic and positive also often requires kind of omitting a bunch of facts that affect our future. So consider yourselves warned and prepare yourself for some negative thinking to end this morning. I can't resist to say briefly that I think the interpretation of Putnam's social capital not living in multicultural environments is not quite correct. But that's a different story, and we can continue discussing on that. Okay, so first a little population statistics. We have 7.5 billion people in the world. A bit of over half live in some form of a democracy. Nearly half, more than 3 billion people, live less than with $2.50 a day. That's dollars, because this is a UN statistics. 80% of the world population lives on less than $10 a day. 1 billion children worldwide live in poverty. Furthermore, there are 65.3 million forcibly replaced people at the moment. This is a record figure in world history. 21.3 million refugees, over the half of whom are under 18. 10 million stateless people. Nearly 1 in 100 people worldwide are displaced from their homes, which is the highest share of world's population that's been forcibly displaced since the UN started calculating these statistics. Of course, this is about 6 in 10 Syrians, for instance. The European Union countries, plus Norway and Switzerland, have received a record of 1.3 million refugees in 2015 and counting, and so on and so forth. Why all these figures? For 2 reasons. First, as much as I am a warm supporter of the capability approach that has so much, and I think in very nice ways put forward in the report, and I'm very happy that it plays such a crucial role in your thinking and in the report you published today. I think it should be noted that currently the capabilities of a great number of people are not valued, are not emphasized, instead are wasted by forcing them to live in extreme poverty or in a state of paperlessness or statelessness or in refugee camps and so on and so forth. And this is not minor. This is huge. This is immense. This is bigger than it's ever been in humanity's history, so as far as we know. So this, I think, should be the greatest concern for people worrying about progress, the wasted capabilities. Secondly, even though I think we here who have no obstacles like the ones people previously described are facing, we indeed have a responsibility of trying to fix things. We have a greater responsibility for that, I think, which is why we're producing these reports and so on and so forth. We also have the tendency of doing so starting with our own backyards. This seems logical, of course, but if we seriously try to achieve progress along the lines that this report, for instance, draws, there's very little, I think, we can achieve if we only look at the Western societies or the Western countries or the richest nations and so on and so forth. So I've grown to really dislike analysis and suggestions that divide the world in this fashion. Of course, always then stating that we are all connected through globalization, we're all connected via internet and so on and so forth, but we still make the division very clearly. And this way, even with the best of intentions, we tend to say, at least between the lines, that the problems in the so-called developing countries are so different and so much worse that we can't really tackle them with the same means, or we can't really tackle them all. I'm not against your approach to localizing problems at all. This is not the same thing, but I think that this can also be viewed very differently. I think there are certainly different scales of problems, we all know that, but humanity's greatest problems really are the same everywhere, starting from global warming, ending at how to live a decent and happy life, I think, and everything that goes between that we've also talked about today. Having said that, I've also concentrated for the most part of my career in Finland and in countries not so far away in my research. But also within this kind of a very wealthy and rich country as Finland, there's a great amount of human capabilities gone wasted. So to rewire progress requires, of course, getting people to join in. Not only those who are already well wired up, connected and ready to use their global links and do incredible things with the internet and so on and so forth, even if also among us, I really feel you about the roof reparation, because I think that YouTube doesn't really solve all of our problems either. But also the ones who are depressed, hopeless, dropped off, too slow, what have you. Also these people exist. And the kind of people actually that almost all of us are at some points of our lives for various degrees and for various amounts of time. Some people unfairly are like this for the most part of their lives. Having spent years doing ethnographic research in a marginalized area in Helsinki, I'm left with a very strong conviction that indeed the capability approach to equality and justice is in many ways very accurate, but it should not be stripped off its political contents. It's not a question of the internet making things possible to people to become the makers or the smiths of their own happiness. It's a question of rendering the society more equal and just, and this is a question of politics and power resources. In order not to outline progress only in terms of those who are quite okay even now, I think we need to think of citizenship in new ways and pose seriously the question how to practice democracy in ways that in which its inherent promise, the promise of justice and equality, could be kept. It's not kept at the moment anywhere, I think. Practicing citizenship in 2010's Finland, for instance, as well as in so many other countries, has been marked by a break in political culture. This break is due to a crisis in representative democracy, a polarization of the civil society, increasing inequality also within the country. What do young people in particular learn and experience as they enter arenas of civic engagement, political participation, society at large in this age? How will they interpret and cope with the increasing inequality and injustice in opportunities to participate, to fulfill one's dreams, and to imagine one's own future? To respond, and one's neighbor's future as well. To respond to this question, not only in Finland, but I think everywhere, we need to provide answers that reach beyond what we imagine as possible today. So the Rewiring Progress Report, I think, is a very good effort. And I would like to invite you to push forward from its starting points and from where it concludes. First, I think that the need to find new ways of distributing wealth globally is not needed in the medium term. I think it's needed in the most immediate term. There's no explanation for the medium term, I think. The current analysis say, for instance, that we're facing a good 20 years of ISIS terrorism in Europe, for instance. In order not to have another one or something worse after these 20 years, we should not wait. And the same goes with global warming, that fast increases poverty in many countries and threatens lives, also ours. Secondly, and lastly, I would also like to stress that we have to reflect what exactly could it mean and what would it take for people to have an experience of being heard, and turning it the other way around. Are we ready to listen what they have to say? Thank you.
Thank you, Eva. Those were really necessary and well elaborated words. I mean, the memorandum was really meant to be a starting point for a kind of a new strain of ideas, and probably there has to be kind of a more detailed volumes going into the very specific question. For instance, how to make the enhance the capabilities for those people who it seems to be the most difficult thing to get that to the elevated level of capabilities through current educational system, through current well, whatever internet can bring to you. And in that sense, I think that has to be the kind of idea of the next text that we are producing from that. And now I think that, well, it's 10 o'clock. We were supposed to end this right now, probably. we'll have 2 to 3 comments, topics from the audience still, just to kind of have at least some type of interaction. So let's have here, we already had 3 first hands, so why don't you start?
Okay, Amos Taylor from the Finland. Okay. Amos Taylor from Finland Futures Research Center. I'm really happy that you brought up poverty. That was some issue because it's part of this. It really represents that poverty is often a local thing that's tried to fix, but it's not connected to the larger picture, and that the poverty is not just some sludge at the bottom of the barrel that you have to clean up. It is something that is systemic. But it also seems to be then who is talking about poverty, who is concerned with poverty. So that's social innovation, maybe those innovation hubs. And they are the places that can kind of do this kind of Swiss cheese innovation across society. So who do you see as the kind of the ones solving poverty?
Who do I see as the ones that currently are solving poverty beyond the government?
Government can, but you see politics as a re-energizing of politics as the key.
Yes, and I think that of course there's a couple of kind of golden rules that tend to make it very hard also for the government to solve issues like poverty, because people who tend to be in power are very rarely poor and are very rarely from poor conditions, and also looking at the electorate of parties in power, for instance, this is hardly the question that they are the most interested in. But I think it's also the question of politicians and governments still being very dependent on this GDP type of measuring of wealth and economic success, and the kind of clinging to the idea of economic growth. And in that kind of thinking, solutions to poverty are not the kind of primary issues. Whereas if we manage to turn this question around a little bit and kind of look at economic development differently, that might, because I'm not so optimistic that I would think that miraculously leading politicians would understand that solving poverty would actually solve a bunch of other issues. But I think if the kind of approach to economy would change, that could also change this.
Thank you. That's a really good question. I think what research on poverty has showed over the past couple of years that although we of course need the kind of still the welfare structures that kind of can maintain people on a kind of a decent level of life when they are poor, it seems like those structures have very little effort in kind of lifting people to the next level. And that has to be something like what you mentioned, kind of a really local social innovations hubs creating those things. And I think there we have the big challenge. Then over there, and then the last by Timo.
Thank you for your comments, Henri Aaltonen. I was just thinking that's a really big question, how to get more participation in the society. And like you said about social innovations, they don't necessarily always have to be material, they can be immaterial. And the really big question for the Western societies and politics, democracy, is how to get more participation for the electorate and how they feel that they are appreciated in this society, and so they are a part of the society and the social cohesion gets stronger and not weaker. So I think your points are really good, and how we should get more active in being guardians of our brothers, like in the big book is always said. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, probably then Timo Hämäläinen, and this will be the last.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm Timo Hämäläinen from Sitra. I think your report, or our report, does a good job in challenging the Finnish discourse on how we want to promote well-being in this society. We usually talk about the economy or the welfare state, which are both instruments with which we hope to improve our citizens' well-being. You also introduce the capability framework, and that certainly gives us a more holistic understanding of well-being. But I would like to suggest a complementary approach which would focus on the true human needs and how well they are satisfied in today's society. We finished a research project a couple of years ago focusing on these issues, and it seems that in today's society we not only need the capabilities to fulfill our sort of more material needs, but there are great unmet psychological needs, and the sort of mental well-being of people is under great stress in today's society, and could explain many of the political events recently that have taken place. And we know that for example, the WHO says that mental illnesses are the biggest single disease group in the world at the moment, and in Finland they are the biggest cause for for sickness pensions in our working life. So besides focusing on the capabilities which people need to fulfill their, to live a good life, I think we also could focus more on these unmet needs in our societies. We tend to focus too much on the material needs.
I mean, yeah, that's a really good comment, and probably we have to somehow add to that. I mean, those would be probably the low-hanging fruits for progress in societies that wouldn't necessarily kind of bring about as great economic growth in a short term, but could then rather fast kind of elevate our well-being and also make a sense of progress to
in a way,
happen.
if I can just add to that, I think the capability approach, if you sort of use it for the whole of its dimensions, actually includes very much the psychological needs of fulfilling one's way of being and so on. So it is. I mean, I think that your addition has a very good point. But this approach also has this side to it, and I think this is very, and linking to the previous comment. I think what is important and what is less seen as, it's not a media sexy thing to do, but in order to sort of enhance people's participation, for instance, there's a big tendency of always doing this from the top down, instead of kind of appreciating existing efforts by people that may seem, from the viewpoint of this kind of classy think tank hub we're in now, they may seem kind of very small and insignificant, but they actually are the sort of bearers of the capabilities that people have. And I think this kind of approach to, for instance, to participatory democracy would give us better results than the current ones often do.
Thank you very much. I have to say, just to promote some of our material, there will be in the same set of nextera.global publications, there will be also an interview on Martha Nussbaum and capabilities approach made by Vesa-Matti Lahti, Mirja Hämäläinen and me, who met Professor Nussbaum last week here in Helsinki. Thank you. Thank you for excellent discussion we had. Looking forward hearing comments from you on the report. I understand that only a few of them had really time to skim it through during the session today. We continue our work towards crafting a vision for sustainable well-being towards September, October. It will be published in November. Do stay in touch, provide us comments, what was good, what we should elaborate more. We are very welcome towards your comments and, of course, any type of collaboration. Thank you. There will be some coffee still available there. Let's move up there. There's a kind of a cafeteria space there, and let's continue discussion there. Sori, mä en tajunnut istua, että oli vähän tälleen hassua.